The bucket slipped from her fingers, sloshing dirty water across the already filthy floor, and Morga froze with her heart hammering as heavy boots thudded toward the kitchen, where she had been scrubbing on her hands and knees for the past 3 hours. She grabbed the rag quickly, wringing it out with trembling hands, praying whoever owned this ramshackle frontier homestead would not look too closely at the girl in threadbare clothes who had slipped into his barn last night seeking shelter from the autumn rain. Her father, Warlord Crag the Bloodthirsty, would have roared with rage to see his only daughter reduced to this, hiding her identity, fleeing the political marriage he had arranged to a brutal clan chieftain twice her age. But Crag was 300 miles north in the Iron Peak Mountains and had no idea where his rebellious child had gone. The boots stopped in the doorway, and Morga kept her eyes down, her small tusks barely visible as she pressed her lips together, willing herself to appear meek and harmless. Most humans in these border territories had never seen an orc woman up close, only the warriors who raided their settlements, and she had learned quickly that showing deference kept the pitchforks and torches at bay. "What in the blazes are you doing in my house?" The voice was deep, roughened by exhaustion, but not immediately hostile. Morga dared a glance upward and found herself staring at a man who looked like he had been carved from the same hard frontier life as the weathered homestead around them. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the doorframe, dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that might have been handsome if not for the weariness etched into every line. His clothes were those of a farmer, sturdy and practical, but there was something in the way he carried himself that spoke of a different past, a harder one. "I am sorry, sir," Morga said quietly, keeping her accent as neutral as possible, though her orcish heritage colored certain vowels. "I sheltered in your barn last night from the storm. I saw the state of your home this morning and thought perhaps I could work for food and a place to sleep, just for a few days, until I can move on." The man, who could not have been more than 30, studied her with eyes the color of weathered stone. He took in her green skin, her pointed ears, the small tusks that marked her as orc-born, and she braced herself for the rejection that usually followed. Instead, he looked at the floor she had been scrubbing, the stack of dirty dishes she had already washed and set to dry, the kindling she had gathered and stacked neatly by the cold hearth. "You have been working since dawn," he said, and it was not a question. "Yes, sir." "I did not wish to be a burden." He was silent for a long moment, and Morga could practically hear the debate waging behind those tired eyes. Taking in an orc, even a young woman who posed no obvious threat, was asking for trouble in these parts where old hatreds ran deep as tree roots. But she could also see the state of his home, the neglect that spoke of a man barely keeping his head above water, drowning in work he could not manage alone. "My name is Thomas Dalton," he said finally. "This is my homestead, such as it is. If you want to work for room and board, I will not turn you away, but I will not have any trouble, understand? No stealing, no bringing your people here to raid." The words stung, but Morga kept her face carefully neutral. "I understand. I have no people to bring. I am alone." Something flickered in Thomas's expression, recognition perhaps, the kinship of one solitary soul recognizing another. "What is your name?" She had prepared for this question during the long, frightening weeks of her flight south. "Mora," she said, using a shortened, more human-sounding version of her true name. "Just Mora." "Well, just Mora. There is bread and cheese in the larder if you are hungry. The well is out back. I have fields to see to, but I will be back by nightfall." He hesitated, then added, "The spare room is upstairs, second door on the left. You can sleep there instead of the barn." Morga felt her throat tighten with unexpected gratitude. "Thank you, sir." "Thomas," he corrected. "Just Thomas, I am not a sir to anyone." He left then, and Morga listened to his boots cross the main room, the creak of the front door, the sound of his footsteps fading toward the fields. Only when she was certain she was alone did she allow herself to slump against the wall, pressing her face into her hands. She had made it through the first encounter. She had not been driven away with violence or contempt. For now, that was enough. The homestead, Morga discovered over the following days, was a testament to one man's stubborn determination to carve a life from unforgiving land. Thomas Dalton worked from before dawn until well after dusk, plowing fields, mending fences, tending to a small herd of cattle, and a handful of chickens that seemed determined to escape at every opportunity. The house itself was a two-story structure of rough-hewn logs, solid enough but bearing signs of long neglect in the details. Shutters hung crooked, floorboards creaked alarmingly. The roof leaked in 3 places that Morga had discovered during another rain. She threw herself into making order from chaos, driven partly by genuine gratitude and partly by the need to stay busy enough that she could not think about what she had left behind or what might be hunting for her even now. Her father would not take her defection lightly. Warlord Crag had built his power on the strength of strategic alliances, and the marriage he had arranged with Chieftain Gromak of the Blackdusk clan was meant to unite 2 of the most powerful orc factions in the north. Morga's refusal and subsequent disappearance had humiliated him before his peers and endangered a carefully negotiated peace. But she would not marry Gromak. She had met him once, seen the cruelty in his eyes, the bruises on the slaves who served him, heard the stories of what had happened to his previous wives. She would rather scrub floors in rags for a stranger than submit to a lifetime of brutality, simply because her bloodline made her a valuable bargaining chip. Thomas spoke little during those first days, offering only brief words of thanks when he came in to find hot meals waiting, clean clothes folded on his bed, the house gradually transforming around him. Morga learned his rhythms, the way he favored his left leg in the evening suggesting an old injury, the nightmares that sometimes had him pacing the creaky floorboards long after midnight, the careful way he avoided touching her, always keeping distance between them as though afraid of giving offense. On the 4th evening, as Morga was setting the table for supper, Thomas finally broke the pattern of comfortable silence. "You do not have to work yourself to exhaustion," he said, washing his hands in the basin she had filled. "I said room and board, not servitude." Morga looked up from the pot of stew she had been stirring, a recipe her mother had taught her before the fever had taken her when Morga was barely 10. "I do not mind the work. It is good to feel useful. Still." Thomas dried his hands on a towel, studying her with that same assessing gaze she was beginning to recognize. "You have been running those floors, mending things I did not even realize were broken, cooking meals I have not had the pleasure of since." He stopped abruptly, and Morga saw old pain flicker across his face. "Since?" she prompted gently. "Since my wife died," he finished quietly. 3 years ago come winter. Fever took her and our daughter both in the same week." The words settled heavy in the warm kitchen, and Morga felt her heart clench with sympathy. That explained so much: the neglected house, the haunted look in his eyes, the bone-deep weariness of a man who had forgotten what it meant to live rather than simply survive. "I am very sorry," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. She understood loss, understood the gaping holes that death left behind. Thomas nodded stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with his own revelation. "It was a long time ago. I have managed." "Managing is not the same as living," Morga said before she could stop herself, then caught her breath, afraid she had overstepped. But Thomas only looked at her with something that might have been surprise or recognition, or perhaps a mixture of both. "No," he agreed slowly. "I suppose it is not." They ate in silence after that, but it was a different quality of silence, less careful, more companionable. Morga found herself relaxing in increments, allowing herself to hope that perhaps this place, this temporary haven, might shelter her a little longer. The first real test came 6 days after her arrival, when Thomas returned from the nearby settlement of Cragwater with supplies loaded in his wagon and a grim expression that set Morga's nerves jangling. She was in the garden, pulling weeds from the overgrown vegetable patch she had discovered behind the house, and she straightened as he approached with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "There are rumors in town," Thomas said without preamble, "about an orc girl traveling alone. They say she is the daughter of some important warlord up north, that there is a reward for information about her whereabouts." Morga's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She forced herself to keep breathing, to not bolt like a frightened deer, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "What kind of reward?" she managed. "Gold, enough to buy a farm twice this size." Thomas watched her carefully, and Morga could not read his expression. "The descriptions match you pretty well. Green skin, small tusks, young, traveling alone. This was it then. The moment she had been dreading." Morga stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands, lifting her chin with the pride her father had drilled into her even as she prepared for rejection, for betrayal. "And will you claim this reward, Thomas Dalton?" He was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence Morga lived 1,000 futures, each one bleaker than the last. Then Thomas shook his head slowly, something fierce and protective crossing his weathered features. "No," he said simply. "I do not care who your father is or what politics you are running from. You have worked hard here, caused no trouble, and I will not sell you to whoever is hunting you. But, Mora, if that is even your real name, I need to know what kind of danger I am harboring. If there will be warriors coming here looking for you." Relief and guilt warred in Morga's chest. She owed him the truth, or at least enough of it to let him make an informed choice. "My real name is Morga. I am the daughter of Warlord Crag, chieftain of the Iron Peak clans. He arranged a marriage for me to a brutal man I could not stomach, and I ran rather than submit. If he finds me, he will drag me back and the marriage will proceed. If my intended finds me first—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the darker possibilities. "Will they come here?" Thomas asked, pragmatic as always. "I do not know. I covered my tracks as best I could, and this place is far from the main roads, but my father is determined and has many resources. Eventually, perhaps." She met his eyes squarely. "I will leave if you wish it. I will not bring trouble to your door after you have shown me kindness." Thomas looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he surprised her again. "Stay," he said. "At least through harvest. I could use the help, and you deserve better than to be married off like livestock." He paused, something almost like a smile crossing his face. "Besides, the house has not been this clean in 3 years. I would be a fool to let you go now." Morga laughed. The sound startled out of her, bright and genuine. It had been so long since she had laughed that the sensation felt foreign, like rediscovering a forgotten language. "You make a compelling argument," she said, warmth flooding through her chest. "I am a practical man," Thomas said, and this time there was definitely a smile, small and rusty but real. "Come on, help me unload the wagon. I bought flour and sugar, thought maybe you could make some of that bread you mentioned." They worked together in the fading afternoon light, and Morga felt something shift between them, a deepening of trust, a sense of alliance. She was not simply a servant working for shelter anymore. She was someone he had chosen to protect, and that choice changed everything. Autumn deepened across the frontier, painting the rolling hills in shades of amber and crimson. Morga found a rhythm in the work, her hands learning the patterns of this new life. She baked bread in the mornings, filling the house with yeasty warmth. She mended Thomas's clothes, her needle flying through fabric as she repaired years of neglect. She worked in the garden, coaxing the last vegetables from the cooling earth, and learned to help with the livestock, discovering she had an unexpected affinity for the chickens that had terrorized Thomas for years. Thomas, for his part, slowly emerged from the shell of grief that had encased him. Morga would catch him humming sometimes as he worked, or see the way his shoulders relaxed when he came in to find supper waiting and lamplight warm in the windows. He began talking more, sharing stories of his past in pieces like a puzzle slowly assembling. He had been a soldier once, Morga learned, serving in the border wars that had raged between human settlements and orc territories for decades. He spoke little of the fighting itself, but she could read between the lines, see the weight of things he had done and seen in the careful neutrality of his voice. He had left that life behind when he married Sarah, bought this homestead with his military pay, and tried to build something peaceful and good. "I killed a lot of orcs," Thomas said one evening, the words blunt and heavy as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. "During the war. It was them or us, or so they told us. Looking back, I am not sure how many of those fights needed to happen at all." Morga was quiet, processing this information, trying to reconcile the gentle man she had come to know with the soldier who had killed her people. "And now," she asked finally, "do you still see orcs as the enemy?" Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, and Morga felt something warm unfurl in her chest at what she saw in his eyes. "No," he said softly. "Now I see a brave young woman who scrubs my floors and makes the best bread I have ever tasted, and who laughs at my chickens when they escape their coop for the 5th time in a week." "They are very determined chickens," Morga said, her voice not quite steady. "Stubborn," Thomas agreed. "Like someone else I know." They fell silent after that, sitting companionably as the stars began to prick through the deepening blue overhead. Morga was acutely aware of Thomas beside her, the solid warmth of him, the way his presence had become a comfort she relied on more than she should. This was supposed to be temporary, she reminded herself. She would stay through harvest, perhaps through winter if the snows came early, and then she would need to move on before she brought danger to his doorstep, or became too attached to a life that could never truly be hers. But her heart, it seemed, had not received that message. The feelings crept up on her slowly, disguised as gratitude at first, then friendship, and finally something deeper and more dangerous. She noticed the way Thomas's rare smiles transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look years younger. She caught herself watching his hands as he worked, strong and capable, and wondering what they might feel like against her skin. She found excuses to brush past him in the kitchen, chasing the brief contact like a moth drawn to flame. It was foolish and hopeless, and she could not seem to stop. Thomas, she suspected, was fighting his own battle. She caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression she could not quite name, something hungry and conflicted and almost afraid. He was careful never to touch her unnecessarily, maintaining that respectful distance even as the space between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. The harvest came on in earnest, and they worked side by side in the fields under the October sun. Morga had never done farm labor before her life in the mountain fortress, had been one of privilege, despite the harsh warrior culture around her, but she learned quickly, driven by determination, and the simple pleasure of working alongside Thomas. They cut wheat in long golden rows, gathered squash and pumpkins from the garden, picked the last apples from the small orchard behind the barn. It was backbreaking work, but there was joy in it too, a satisfaction Morga had never experienced in her old life. When they came in at day's end, exhausted and covered in chaff and dirt, there was a comfortable intimacy in the way they moved around each other, the easy domesticity of shared space and shared purpose. "You are a natural farmer," Thomas said one evening as they sat shelling beans at the kitchen table, building stores for the coming winter. "Your people do not grow crops in the mountains." "Some do," Morga said, her fingers working automatically to split the pods and spill their contents into the bowl between them. "But my father's clan were primarily warriors and hunters. We raided and traded for what we needed. Growing things was seen as—" She paused, searching for the word. "Soft, beneath us." "That seems like a hard way to live," Thomas observed. "It was the only way I knew." Morga shrugged. "I was raised to be a warlord's daughter first, a person second. Everything I did was judged by how it reflected on my father's strength, his status among the clans. There was no room for softness or personal desire." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling in their work. "Is that why you ran? Just because of the marriage?" Morga considered the question, turning it over in her mind. "Partly. I could not bear the thought of being given to Gromek like a prized cow, but also—" She trailed off, struggling to articulate feelings she had barely acknowledged to herself. "I wanted to choose my own path. To find out who I might be if I was not simply Cragg's daughter, a piece in his political games. Does that make sense?" "More than you know," Thomas said quietly. "I spent 10 years in the army being told where to march, who to kill, what to think. When I finally bought my freedom and this land, I swore I would never let anyone else control my life again." He smiled ruefully. "Then I discovered that freedom is harder than following orders. At least when someone else makes the decisions, you can blame them when things go wrong." "Do you regret it, leaving the military, choosing this life?" "No." Thomas's answer was immediate and firm. "Sarah and I had 3 good years here before the fever. That was worth everything else, and even after." He gestured vaguely at the house around them, the fields beyond. "This is mine. Hard won and hard kept, but mine. No one can take that away." Morga felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went bone deep. "I envy that," she admitted. "I have never had anything that was truly mine. Everything I possessed was given by my father's sufferance, could be taken away at his whim. Even my own future was not my own to determine." "It is now," Thomas said, his gray eyes intense as they met hers across the table. "You chose to leave. You chose your own path. That takes courage most people never find." "Or foolishness," Morga said, but she could not help the small smile that tugged at her lips. "Sometimes they are the same thing," Thomas said, and there was something in his voice, in the way he was looking at her, that made Morga's breath catch. The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric, and Morga felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Thomas's hand had stopped moving, hovering over the bowl of beans, and she realized with a start that it was trembling slightly. She wanted to reach across the table, to close the distance between them, to touch him and be touched in return. The wanting was a physical ache, fierce and terrifying in its intensity. Then Thomas cleared his throat and looked away, breaking the spell, and the moment passed. They returned to their work in silence, but Morga's hands were shaking now too, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was in far deeper than she had ever intended to be. Winter's approach announced itself in cold winds that rattled the shutters and morning frost that turned the field silver. Thomas spent his days preparing the homestead for the hard months ahead, banking earth around the foundation, chopping wood until the shed overflowed with split logs, repairing the barn roof before snow could find its weak points. Morga helped where she could and worked on her own projects besides. She had found fabric in town during one of their supply runs and spent her evening sewing, her fingers remembering skills her mother had taught her long ago. She made herself a proper dress to replace the rags she had arrived in, and then, emboldened, began work on a new shirt for Thomas to replace the one she had mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible beneath her stitches. "You do not have to do that," Thomas protested when he caught her at the work, but his eyes lingered on the careful seams, the precise stitches, and Morga could see he was touched by the gesture. "I want to," she said simply. "You have given me so much, let me give something back." The first snow came in mid-November, a light dusting that transformed the world into something magical and strange. Morga stood at the window watching it fall, transfixed by the beauty of it. Snow was common in the mountains, but there was something different about it here in the quiet lowlands, gentler and more peaceful. "You look happy," Thomas said from behind her, and she turned to find him watching her with a soft expression that made her heart flutter. "I am," she admitted. "Happier than I have been in years, maybe ever. Is that strange?" "No." Thomas moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I understand completely. This place, this life, it is simple, but there is freedom in that simplicity. Room to breathe." They stood together watching the snow fall, and Morga felt the weight of all her unspoken feelings pressing against her ribs, demanding release. She had been careful for so long, guarding her heart, maintaining appropriate distance, but the careful walls she had built were crumbling with every passing day. "Thomas," she began, not sure what she meant to say, knowing only that she needed to say something before the moment passed. But before she could continue, a sound shattered the peaceful quiet, the thunder of hoofbeats approaching fast, multiple riders pushing their mounts hard. Thomas went rigid beside her, his soldier's instincts flaring to life, and Morga felt ice water flood her veins as she recognized the cadence of those hoofbeats. Orcs rode differently than humans, trained from childhood on the massive war horses bred in the mountain valleys. "Get upstairs," Thomas said urgently, already moving toward the rifle he kept mounted above the fireplace. "Hide in the back room and do not come out until I call for you." "Thomas." "No," Morga grabbed his arm, desperate. "If they are looking for me, I should face them. I will not let you fight my battles. And I will not hand you over to men who want to drag you into a marriage you fled across half the territory to avoid," Thomas said fiercely. His hand came up to cup her face, calloused palm warm against her cheek, and Morga's breath stuttered at the contact, at the naked emotion blazing in his eyes. "Please, Morga, trust me. Let me protect you." The hoofbeats were closer now, almost at the door. Morga wanted to argue, wanted to stay at his side, but the desperate plea in Thomas's face broke her resolve. She nodded jerkily and fled up the stairs as the first hammering knock shook the front door. From her hiding place in the back bedroom, pressed against the wall beside the window, Morga could hear voices filtering up from below. The door had opened. Thomas would not be foolish enough to bar it against armed men, and now there were heavy footsteps in the house, multiple sets, and voices speaking in the guttural orcish tongue of the northern clans. "We seek a fugitive," said a voice Morga recognized with a lurch of her stomach. Gorthak, one of her father's senior warriors, a scarred veteran who had taught her knife fighting when she was a child. "The daughter of Warlord Crag. We have reason to believe she may have passed through this area." "I live alone here," Thomas said, his voice steady and cool. "I have seen no orc women, fugitive or otherwise. You will not object to us searching your home, then?" It was not a question, and Morga heard the creak of floorboards as the warriors began to move through the downstairs rooms. Her heart was a wild thing in her chest, threatening to break free. She looked around desperately for a better hiding place, knowing they would search upstairs next, knowing her presence would be discovered in minutes. The window she could climb out onto the porch roof, but the fresh snow would show her tracks clearly. The wardrobe was too obvious. Under the bed would be the first place they looked. Footsteps on the stairs now, heavy and inexorable. Morga pressed herself into the corner, making herself as small as possible, knowing it was futile but unable to surrender without trying. The door to her room swung open, and she found herself staring at Gorthak's weathered face, his expression flickering from triumph to something that might have been regret as their eyes met. "Lady Morga," he said formally, and sheathed his sword. "Your father has been very worried." "I am sure he has," Morga said, lifting her chin even as her hands trembled. Losing his political bargaining chip must have been very inconvenient for him. Gorthak's jaw tightened. "You dishonor him with your words and your actions. He is your father and your chieftain. You owe him obedience." "I owe him nothing," Morga shot back, anger flooding through her fear. "He would sell me to a monster for the sake of an alliance. What father does that to his only child?" "It is not my place to question the Warlord's decisions," Gorthak said, but there was something uncertain in his voice now, a crack in his warrior's resolve. "My orders are to bring you home. You will come peacefully or I will carry you. Choose. She is not going anywhere." Thomas stood in the doorway, his rifle leveled at Gorthak's chest, his face set in hard, dangerous lines that reminded Morga viscerally that he had been a soldier once, had killed men and orcs both in service to his causes. The easygoing farmer had vanished, replaced by someone cold and deadly. "Human, this does not concern you," Gorthak said, his hand drifting back toward his sword hilt. "The girl belongs to her clan. Stand aside." "No," Thomas's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "She is under my protection. She stays here." "There are 5 of us and 1 of you," Gorthak pointed out. "You may kill me, but the others will cut you down and take her anyway. Do not throw your life away for a fugitive orc." "She is not a fugitive," Thomas said, and something in his voice made Morga's heart clench. "She is a woman who chose freedom over slavery, and I will die before I let you drag her back to a fate she does not want. But you are right that I cannot fight all of you." He paused, and then did something that shocked everyone in the room. He lowered the rifle and looked directly at Morga, his gray eyes boring into hers with terrible intensity. "So I am offering a different solution. Morga, will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop, the question hanging in the air like something physical and weighty. Morga stared at Thomas, unable to process what she had just heard, her mind reeling. "What?" she whispered. "Marry me," Thomas repeated, and now there was something fierce and almost desperate in his expression. "If you are my wife, they cannot take you without starting a blood feud with me. It is not much, but it is the only protection I can offer you." He took a breath, never breaking eye contact. "I know it is not what you wanted, not real, but it is a choice at least. Your choice. I am asking, not commanding." Morga felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. He was offering her everything: his name, his protection, his life. It would not be enough to stop a determined warlord, perhaps, but it would complicate things, buy time, create obligations and consequences her father would have to navigate. And more than the practicality of it, more than the political maneuvering, Thomas was giving her what no one else ever had, a choice made freely without coercion or pressure. "Yes," she said, the word breaking from her chest like a prayer. "Yes, I will marry you." Gorthak looked between them, his scarred face a mask of conflicting emotions. "This is a trick," he said finally. A human and an orc cannot marry. It is not recognized by any law. It is recognized by frontier law, Thomas said firmly. Any partnership freely entered and witnessed is binding. I know the codes. I helped write them during my military service. If Morga consents and we speak the vows, she becomes my wife in the eyes of every settlement and outpost from here to the coast. And what of orcish law? Gorthak demanded. The Warlord arranged a marriage. That contract supersedes any human ceremony. Not if the bride is already wed to another, Thomas countered. Check your own laws, warrior. A woman cannot be given to two men. If Morga is my wife, the contract with Chieftain Gromak is void. Morga watched Gorthak's face as he processed this, saw the moment he realized Thomas was right. Orcish marriage law was specific and ancient, one of the few things that even a warlord could not simply override by decree. If she was truly married to Thomas, her father could rage and threaten, but he could not legally force her to wed Gromak without dissolving her existing marriage, first a process that would require Thomas's consent or death. You understand what you are doing? Gorthak asked Thomas, his voice hard. By taking her as wife, you make yourself an enemy of Warlord Crag. He will not forgive this insult. You will be hunted. Then I will be hunted, Thomas said simply. I have been hunted before. I survived. Gorthak turned to Morga, and she saw something that might have been respect in his dark eyes. Is this truly what you want, lady? This human, this life? You would give up everything for it. Morga looked at Thomas, at the man who had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return, who had protected her, and made her laugh and given her a glimpse of what it might mean to live for herself rather than for duty and obligation. She thought about the last months, the quiet joy of working beside him, the way her heart had slowly opened like a flower turning toward sunlight. She thought about the future that lay before her, uncertain and frightening but hers to shape. Yes, she said, and meant it with her whole heart. This is what I want. Gorthak was silent for a long moment. Then, to Morga's shock, he nodded slowly and turned to the warriors waiting in the hallway behind him. Bear witness, he said formally. Thomas Dalton and Morga, daughter of Crag, speak your vows if you would be wed. I will carry word of this marriage to the Warlord, and let him judge what comes next. It was not blessing exactly, but it was close enough to permission that Morga felt light-headed with relief. Thomas stepped forward, his hand reaching for hers, and she took it without hesitation, feeling the calluses against her palm, the steady warmth of his grip. I, Thomas Dalton, take you, Morga, as my wife, Thomas said, his voice quiet but absolutely steady. I promise to protect you, honor you, and stand beside you for as long as we both live. I, Morga, daughter of Crag, take you, Thomas Dalton, as my husband, Morga echoed, her voice breaking on the words. I promise to honor you, stand beside you, and choose you every day for as long as we both live. Witnessed and recognized, Gorthak said formally. Then, more quietly, farewell, Lady Morga. I hope you have chosen wisely. The warriors left as suddenly as they had come, their hoofbeats fading into the snowy afternoon. Thomas and Morga stood in the upstairs bedroom, hands still clasped, staring at each other as the magnitude of what they had just done settled over them like snow. I am sorry, Thomas said finally, his thumb moving unconsciously over her knuckles. I know that was not how you wanted this to happen. I backed you into a corner. You gave me a choice, Morga corrected, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. That is more than anyone else ever has. Thomas, she stopped, the words catching in her throat, too big and too frightening to speak aloud. But Thomas seemed to understand anyway. His hand came up to cup her face again, the gesture achingly gentle, and Morga leaned into the touch like a flower seeking sun. "I know," he said softly. "I know because I feel it too, have been feeling it for weeks now, maybe longer. I told myself it was just gratitude or loneliness or the comfort of having another person in the house. But it is more than that, is it not?" "Yes," Morga whispered. "So much more." Thomas leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and Morga met him halfway. Their lips touched tentatively, a question and an answer, and then the kiss deepened as weeks of unspoken longing finally found release. Morga made a sound low in her throat, her hands fisting in Thomas's shirt, pulling him closer as years of loneliness and hunger poured out of her in waves. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers with his eyes closed. "This is real," he said, and it was not quite a question. "This is not just for show, not just to protect you from your father's claim." "No," Morga agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "This is real. I want this. I want you. I have wanted you for longer than I was willing to admit." Thomas pulled back enough to look at her, and the naked emotion in his face took her breath away. "I did not think I would feel this way again," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I locked that part of myself away. It seemed safer, less painful. But you, Morga, you brought me back to life. You made me remember what it means to hope, to care about tomorrow instead of just surviving today." Morga felt tears spilling over, tracking down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "You gave me freedom," she said. "You gave me a home. You gave me myself." They stood there holding each other as the snow fell outside and the afternoon light faded into evening. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and chosen to bind their fates together. The marriage was real in law, but making it real in truth took time and tenderness. That night they ate a quiet supper together, the familiar ritual made strange and new by the knowledge that everything had changed. Morga caught Thomas watching her across the table with an expression that made her skin flush warm, and she found herself hyper-aware of every movement, every breath, the crackling tension between them almost unbearable. When the meal was done and the dishes washed, they stood awkwardly in the main room, neither quite sure how to navigate this new dynamic. Thomas had insisted Morga take the spare room when she first arrived, claiming the master bedroom for himself. But the unspoken question hung between them now: would that arrangement continue? Or would they share a bed as married couples did? "I do not want to rush you," Thomas said finally, his hands shoved in his pockets, looking adorably uncertain for a man who had faced down armed warriors that afternoon. "This all happened so fast. If you need time, I understand." Morga considered this, her heart thundering. She was nervous. Certainly the physical intimacy of marriage was something she had avoided thinking about during her engagement to Gromack, too horrified by the prospect to examine it closely. But Thomas was not Gromack. Thomas was kind and gentle and looked at her like she was precious, and the thought of being close to him, of finally acting on the desire that had been building between them for weeks, sent heat flooding through her body. "I do not need time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been waiting for this for you, without even knowing it." "Thomas, I want," she faltered, unsure how to articulate the complex tangle of wanting and nervousness and need. Thomas crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that made her ache. "Tell me," he said softly. "Tell me what you want and I will give it to you, or I will wait as long as you need. You are in control here, Morga, always." The promise in those words, the absolute certainty that he would honor her wishes above his own desires, was what finally dissolved the last of her uncertainty. "I want you," she said clearly. "I want my husband, tonight and every night after." Thomas's breath caught, and then he was kissing her again, deeper this time, his hands sliding into her dark hair as she pressed against him. Morga had been kissed before, experimental fumbling with a young warrior when she was 16, but nothing had prepared her for this, the heat and hunger of it, the way her body seemed to catch fire everywhere Thomas touched. He drew back just enough to take her hand, his gray eyes dark with desire but also patience, always patience. "Come with me," he said, and led her upstairs to the master bedroom she had cleaned and tidied 100 times but never entered as anything but a servant. The room was simple but comfortable, dominated by a large bed covered in quilts Morga had washed and mended. Thomas lit the lamp on the bedside table, then turned to her with endearing uncertainty written all over his face. "I have not done this in a long time," he admitted. "And never with someone who was not human. If I do something wrong or hurt you, you must tell me." Morga felt a rush of affection for this strong man who could face down warriors without flinching, but was nervous about being intimate with his own wife. "I will tell you," she promised. "And Thomas, I have never done this at all, so we will learn together." That surprised him. She saw it in the widening of his eyes. "Never, but you were betrothed before." "Betrothed, not married," Morga clarified. "I never allowed Gromek close enough to claim that privilege, and I am grateful now that I did not. I am glad my first time will be with you, someone I chose, someone I—" She stopped, the word love hovering unspoken but implied. Thomas's expression softened into something so tender it made her throat tight. "I am glad too," he said simply, and drew her close again. They undressed each other slowly, punctuating each revealed inch of skin with kisses and soft touches, building heat gradually. Morga had been self-conscious about her body, so different from human women with her green skin and the faint natural markings that traced her shoulders and spine. But Thomas touched her like she was beautiful, his hands reverent, his voice breathless with praise. When they finally came together, it was with a gentleness that brought tears to Morga's eyes. Thomas was patient and attentive, watching her reactions, adjusting his movements to bring her pleasure even as he fought for his own control. There was brief pain, but it was swept away quickly by sensation and closeness, and the overwhelming rightness of being joined with this man she had come to love. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the warm darkness, Thomas's hand stroking slow patterns on her back as Morga rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat. "I love you," Thomas said quietly into the darkness, the words settling over them like a benediction. "I did not plan to, did not want to risk my heart again, but I love you, Morga. You are the best thing to happen to me in years." Morga felt her chest expand with joy so fierce it was almost painful. "I love you too," she whispered against his skin. "I did not know love could feel like this. Safe and wild all at once." Thomas's arms tightened around her. "Whatever comes next, whatever your father sends after us, we will face it together. You are not alone anymore." "Neither are you," Morga pointed out and felt him smile against her hair. They drifted to sleep wrapped in each other, and for the first time in her life, Morga felt completely, perfectly at peace. The winter that followed was both idyllic and tense, a strange combination of domestic bliss and constant vigilance. Thomas and Morga settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both, their partnership deepening from fondness into genuine love. They worked together during the day, maintaining the homestead, keeping the livestock fed, and the paths cleared when snow fell heavy. In the evenings they sat by the fire, Morga sewing or mending while Thomas carved wood into useful objects: spoons, bowls, a beautiful comb he presented to her shyly on the night of the winter solstice. But they were not foolish enough to believe Gorthak's report would be the end of things. Thomas spent time each day practicing with his rifle, and the sword he had kept from his military days, the blade well oiled and sharp, despite years of disuse. He taught Morga to shoot, standing behind her to correct her stance, his hands warm on her waist as she learned to sight down the barrel and squeeze the trigger smoothly. "You have good instincts," Thomas said after she put 3 shots in a tight group on the tree they were using for target practice. "Have you trained with weapons before?" "Knives," Morga admitted. "My father believed his daughter should be able to defend herself if necessary. I am decent in close combat, though I have never actually fought anyone." "Let us hope it stays that way," Thomas said, but there was approval in his voice. They were preparing for war, both of them knew it, but neither spoke the fear aloud that their preparations might not be enough. The attack came in late January, during a cold snap that left the world frozen and brittle. Morga woke in the pre-dawn darkness to the sound of Thomas moving through the house with quick, quiet efficiency, and she knew without asking that the time had come. "How many?" she asked, rising and pulling on her warmest clothes with shaking hands. "At least a dozen on horseback, maybe more," Thomas said grimly, checking his weapons with the practiced ease of a veteran. "They are not trying to be subtle this time. I think they mean to take you by force and kill anyone who stands in their way." "My father," Morga said, her heart sinking. She had hoped he might accept the marriage, however reluctantly, might choose political face-saving over violence. But Warlord Crag had not built his power by accepting defiance, even from his own daughter. "We need to leave," Thomas said. "Now, I have supplies already packed in the barn. If we can reach the horses before they surround the house, we might make it to Cragwater. The garrison there will offer protection." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only plan they had. Morga grabbed the small pack she had kept ready for weeks, the one containing her few precious possessions and the money Thomas had been setting aside for emergencies. They crept down the stairs and out the back door, the pre-dawn cold biting through their layers as they ran for the barn. They almost made it. The warriors materialized from the darkness like shadows given form, a half-circle of armed orcs blocking their path to the barn. Morga recognized her father immediately, his massive form unmistakable even backlit by torchlight. Warlord Crag stood head and shoulders above most of his warriors, battle-scarred and fierce, every inch the legendary chieftain who had united the fractious mountain clans through force of will and strength of arms. "Morga," he said, his voice carrying easily across the frozen yard. "This foolishness ends now. Come home with me and face the consequences of your dishonor." "I am already home," Morga called back, her voice steadier than she felt. Thomas stood beside her, sword drawn, positioning himself slightly in front of her in a protective stance that made her heart clench. "I am married, father. Your contract with Gromak is void. Let this end here." "You married a human," Crag spat the word like a curse. "You dishonor our entire bloodline with this perversion. I should have drowned you at birth rather than raise a daughter who would betray her people for a weak human farmer." The words stung, but Morga had expected them. She had known from the moment she fled that there would be no reconciliation, no middle ground where her father might accept her choices. Warlord Crag dealt in absolute strength and weakness, obedience and rebellion, honor and shame. "If I dishonor you, then disown me," Morga said, lifting her chin. "Release me from the clan and I will trouble you no more. You can tell the other chieftains that I died, that you killed me for my disobedience. Whatever story lets you keep your precious alliance with Gromak." For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in her father's face, some shadow of the man who had once taught her to ride, who had held her when nightmares woke her after her mother's death. But it was gone in an instant, buried under the iron control of the Warlord. "I will not be dictated to by a disobedient child," Crag said coldly. "You will return with me, your false marriage will be dissolved, and you will wed Gromak as arranged. This human," his gaze shifted to Thomas with contempt, "will die for the insult of touching what was not his to claim." "She was never yours to give away," Thomas said, his voice cutting through the frozen air like a blade. "Morga is her own person, not property to be traded for political advantage. If you were any kind of father, you would see that." The words seemed to strike Crag like a physical blow. His face darkened with rage, tusks baring in a snarl. "You dare lecture me about fatherhood, human? You who stole my daughter with honeyed words and false promises." "I offered her freedom," Thomas shot back. "Something you never did. I gave her a choice. That is more than you ever offered." "Enough!" Crag roared, and the warriors around him shifted, hands moving to weapons. "I will not bandy words with a dead man. Kill him. Bring me my daughter alive." The warriors surged forward, and time seemed to slow. Thomas pushed Morga behind him, his sword coming up to meet the first attacker, steel ringing against steel in the frozen dawn. Morga fumbled for the knife at her belt, the one weapon she had trained with enough to trust, her heart in her throat as she watched Thomas fight. He was magnificent and terrifying, every movement precise and economical, the rusty farmer vanishing to reveal the veteran soldier beneath. He cut down the first warrior, pivoted to block a strike from the second, his blade a silver arc in the torchlight. But there were too many, far too many, and Morga could see the moment when numbers would overcome skill. She had to do something. She could not simply stand by and watch Thomas die defending her. The knife left her hand before she fully registered the decision to throw it, muscle memory from years of practice taking over. It buried itself in the shoulder of the warrior about to strike Thomas from behind, and the orc bellowed in pain and surprise, giving Thomas the second he needed to spin and dispatch the threat. But the action had drawn attention to Morga. Two warriors broke from the main group and rushed her, and she had no time to draw another weapon before they were on her. She fought with everything she had, striking and kicking and clawing, but they were larger and stronger and trained since childhood for combat. Rough hands seized her arms, dragging her backward even as she screamed and struggled. "No," Thomas's voice, raw with desperation. "Morga," she saw him turn, saw him try to fight his way toward her, but there were too many bodies between them. A warrior's fist connected with Thomas's jaw and he staggered, his sword dipping for just a moment. It was enough. Another warrior's blade sliced across his side, drawing a line of red, and Thomas went to one knee with a grimace of pain. "Stop!" Morga screamed, terror flooding her veins. "Stop, please. I will come with you, father. I will do whatever you want. Just do not kill him, please." The fighting paused, warriors stepping back at Crag's raised hand. The warlord approached Thomas, who was still on one knee, hand pressed to his bleeding side, his face pale but defiant. Crag's massive hand shot out, catching Thomas by the throat and hauling him upright. "You cost me a valuable alliance," Crag said softly, dangerously. "You stole my daughter and corrupted her with your weakness. Give me one reason I should not snap your neck right now." Thomas met Crag's eyes without flinching, and when he spoke his voice was hoarse but steady. "Because she loves me. And somewhere under that warlord exterior, you love her too. If you kill me, she will never forgive you. You will lose her forever, not to marriage but to hatred." Crag's hand tightened, and Morga could see Thomas struggling to breathe, his face darkening. "Father, please," she begged, straining against the warriors holding her. "Please, if you ever loved me at all, do not do this." For a long, terrible moment, Crag stood frozen, his hand around Thomas's throat, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Then, slowly, he released his grip and let Thomas drop to the ground in a gasping heap. "Bind him," Crag ordered his warriors. "We bring them both back to the mountains. Let the clan council decide their fates." It was not mercy, not exactly, but it was not immediate execution either. Morga sagged in her captor's grip, weak with relief even as fear gnawed at her. They were both alive for now. That was something. They bound Thomas's hands and put Morga on a horse, her wrists tied to the saddle horn. Thomas was forced to walk, a rope around his neck held by one of the mounted warriors, his wounded side leaving a trail of dark drops in the snow. Morga twisted in her saddle, trying to keep him in sight, her heart breaking at the grim set of his jaw, the way he stumbled occasionally but always forced himself upright again. They traveled north for days, pushing hard through winter weather that turned brutal. Morga tried repeatedly to speak to her father, to plead Thomas's case, but Crag refused to acknowledge her, riding at the head of the column with his face set like stone. The warriors were more talkative, and from their conversations Morga pieced together what had happened after Gorthak's report. Her father had been furious at the news of her marriage, as expected. He had raged and threatened and broken furniture. But it was Gromak who had truly escalated things. The Black Tusk chieftain had taken Morga's rejection as a personal insult and demanded her return, threatening to break the alliance and make war on Crag's clans if the Warlord could not control his own daughter. Caught between humiliation and political necessity, Crag had assembled his best warriors and marched south to reclaim his wayward child by force. He should have just killed the human and been done with it. One warrior muttered to another when they thought Morga could not hear. "Taking him back to the mountains just complicates things. The Warlord is soft where his daughter is concerned," the other replied. "Always has been, even when he pretends otherwise. Mark my words, this will end badly." Morga did not know if that assessment gave her hope or made her more afraid. They reached the mountain stronghold of the Iron Peak clans on the 10th day of travel, ascending narrow passes where the wind cut like knives and the air thinned until every breath was an effort. Morga had been raised in these mountains, but they felt alien to her now, hostile and cold after the gentle lowlands of Thomas's homestead. The fortress itself was carved partially into the mountainside, a combination of natural caves and built structures that had housed the clan for generations. Crag's Hall was the largest, a cavernous space heated by massive fireplaces and lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. They were brought before the assembled clan council that same evening, Morga and Thomas both bound and flanked by guards. Morga's stomach churned as she recognized the faces around the council fire-hardened chieftains and clan elders, her father's most trusted advisors, and at the position of honor beside Crag himself, Chieftain Gromak. Gromak was a massive orc, even by the standards of their people, with arms like tree trunks and a face that seemed permanently twisted in a sneer. Scars crisscrossed his green skin, trophies from countless battles, and his eyes were cold and calculating as they raked over Morga with undisguised possessiveness. "So this is the famous runaway bride," Gromak said, his voice like gravel grinding together. "She does not look like much. Hardly worth the trouble she has caused." Morga bit back the retort that burned on her tongue, knowing it would only make things worse. Beside her, she felt Thomas tense, his hands clenching in their bonds, and she willed him silently to stay quiet, to not give these men an excuse to hurt him. "The council will hear the charges," intoned one of the elders, an ancient orc whose name Morga could not remember. "Morga, daughter of Crag, you stand accused of betraying your clan, dishonoring your chieftain, and breaking a marriage contract. How do you answer?" I answer that I had the right to refuse a marriage that would have destroyed me, Morga said, keeping her voice as steady as she could. I answer that I chose freedom and love over duty and misery. If that is betrayal, then I am guilty. The girl speaks of love as though it matters, Gromek spat. Marriage is not about love. It is about alliances, about strength, about building power for the clan. Her selfish desires mean nothing against the needs of our people. And what of her needs? Thomas spoke for the first time, his voice carrying clearly through the hall despite his exhaustion. Does she not matter at all? Is she just a thing to be traded with no say in her own future? Silence, human, one of the chieftains roared. You have no voice in this council. Then what am I doing here? Thomas shot back. If you have already decided my fate and Morga's, why the pretense of a trial? Just kill me and be done with it. Thomas, no, Morga started, but her father cut her off with a sharp gesture. The human raises a fair question, Crag said heavily. He had not spoken since they arrived, but now all eyes turned to him. Why are we here? The clan laws are clear. Morga broke her contract. She should be punished and the marriage to Gromek should proceed. And yet... He paused, his gaze moving to his daughter, and Morga saw something in his face that might have been pain. And yet I cannot stop seeing her as she was when she was small. Brave and fierce, and always asking why things had to be a certain way. I raised her to question, to think for herself, and now I punish her for doing exactly that. You grow maudlin, Crag, Gromek said dismissively. The girl defied you. She dishonored her clan. She must face the consequences. Must she? Crag's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Or is this about your wounded pride, Gromek? My daughter fled rather than marry you. Perhaps the question we should be asking is why. The hall went very still. Gromek's face darkened with rage. You dare question my honor. I question your fitness as a husband, Crag said bluntly. I have heard the stories about your previous wives, Gromek. The bruises they bore, the fear in their eyes. I told myself it was none of my concern, that you had the right to manage your household as you saw fit. But that was before my daughter became part of that household. Those females needed discipline, Gromek snarled. They were weak, disobedient. I did what was necessary to maintain order. You beat them, Morga said, finding her voice again. One of them died from your discipline, did she not? An accident, you claimed, but everyone knew the truth. Gromek surged to his feet, and for a moment Morga thought he would strike her right there in front of the council. But Crag moved between them, his massive form blocking Gromek's path. Is it true? Crag demanded. Did you kill your last wife? She fell, Gromek said tightly. It was an accident. I was cleared by my clan's elders. Elders you control, one of the other chieftains spoke up unexpectedly. I remember the incident, Crag. There were questions at the time, but Gromek's power in his clan is absolute. No one dared challenge his version of events. The council erupted into argument, voices rising as old suspicions and new revelations clashed. Morga stood in the center of it all, hardly daring to breathe, feeling the political tide shifting around her in ways she could not quite follow. Finally, Crag raised his hand for silence. When the hall quieted, he spoke with the weight of absolute authority. I will not give my daughter to a man who might kill her, he said flatly. Gromek, the marriage contract is dissolved. You will be compensated for the insult in gold and cattle, but Morga will not be your bride. Gromek's face was a mask of fury. This is unacceptable. We had an agreement, Crag. You cannot simply break it because you have developed a soft heart for your wayward daughter. I am Warlord of the Iron Peak clans, Crag said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. I can do whatever I damn well please. Challenge me if you disagree. It was a direct threat, an invitation to single combat that everyone in the hall understood. Gromek was large and brutal, but Crag was legendary, a warrior who had earned his position through countless battles. For a long moment, Gromek seemed to consider taking the challenge, his hand drifting toward his weapon. Then, wisely, he backed down. "This is not over," Gromek promised darkly. "You dishonor me, Crag, and that will have consequences." "Then let them come," Crag said with finality. "This council is concluded. Gromek, you have 1 day to leave my territory. After that, you will be treated as an enemy." Gromek stormed from the hall, his warriors trailing behind him, and Morga felt tension drain from her body so quickly she nearly collapsed. The marriage was broken. She was free of Gromek. But what did that mean for her and Thomas? Crag turned to them, his expression unreadable. "Take the human to the guest quarters and see his wounds are tended. Morga, come with me. We have much to discuss." Morga was separated from Thomas despite her protests, watching helplessly as he was led away by guards who were at least not actively hostile. Then she followed her father through the winding corridors of the stronghold to his private chambers, a space she had not entered since she was a child. The room was much as she remembered, functional and Spartan, decorated only with weapons and battle trophies from Crag's long career. Her father moved to a cabinet and poured 2 cups of strong mountain wine, pressing one into her hands before settling heavily into his chair. "Sit," he ordered, gesturing to the seat across from him. When Morga obeyed, he studied her in silence for a long moment. "You have changed," he said finally. "You look different, softer perhaps, but also stronger." "I am different," Morga agreed. "These months away have shown me who I am when I am not trying to be the daughter you wanted me to be." Crag winced as though she had struck him. "And who is that?" "Someone who wants to choose her own path," Morga said carefully. "Someone who values kindness over strength, partnership over dominance. Someone who has learned that there is more to life than duty and honor and the endless competition for power." She paused, then added softly, "Someone who is happy, father, for the first time in years, with the human." It was not quite a question. "Yes, with Thomas." Morga leaned forward, desperate to make him understand. "He is a good man, father. He worked hard to build a life for himself after the war. He showed me kindness when he had no reason to, protected me when it put him in danger, and offered me freedom when he could have used me for his own purposes. I love him, not because he is convenient or politically advantageous, but because he makes me want to be better. Because when I am with him, I finally feel like I fit somewhere." Crag was quiet for a long time, swirling the wine in his cup. "I did not arrange the marriage to Gromek out of cruelty," he said eventually. "I thought I was doing what was best for the clan, for our security. The Blacktusk alliance would have made us nearly unstoppable. I thought you would understand that duty sometimes requires sacrifice." "But it was my life you were sacrificing," Morga pointed out, "not yours. It is easy to talk about duty and sacrifice when you are not the one paying the price." "You are right," Crag said, and Morga nearly dropped her cup in shock. Her father never admitted fault, never showed weakness. "I was wrong. I should have listened when you tried to tell me about Gromek's nature. I should have cared more about your happiness than my political maneuvering. I should have been a better father." Tears burned in Morga's eyes. "You were not entirely terrible," she managed. "You taught me to be strong, to stand up for myself. You just never thought I would use those lessons against your plans." Crag laughed, a rusty sound that might have been bitter or amused or both. "No, I did not. You are too much like me, Morga, too stubborn for your own good." He set down his cup and leaned forward, his expression serious. "I will not force you to stay here. I will not drag you from your human and imprison you in the mountains. You are free to return to him if that is what you truly want." Hope flared bright in Morga's chest. "You mean that? You will let us go? On one condition, Crag said, raising a hand. Let me meet him properly. Let me see for myself the man who won my daughter's heart so completely that she would give up everything for him. If he proves himself worthy, I will give you both my blessing and enough gold to see you comfortable through the winter. But if he is a coward or a fool, I will know it, and my permission will be withdrawn. It was a test, obviously, but it was also the closest thing to approval Morga was likely to receive. She nodded quickly, afraid her father might change his mind. Thomas is neither coward nor fool. He will prove himself to you. Then bring him here tomorrow at midday, Crag said. We will speak, and I will make my judgment. Morga was escorted to the guest quarters where Thomas was being held, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She found him sitting on a low bed, his side freshly bandaged, looking exhausted but alert. His face transformed when he saw her, relief and joy chasing away the weariness. Morga, he said, rising despite the obvious pain it caused him. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? I am fine, Morga assured him, crossing to him quickly and wrapping her arms around him, careful of his wounded side. Better than fine. Thomas, he is going to let us go. He dissolved the contract with Gromek and he says we can return to the homestead. Thomas held her tight, his face buried in her hair. That is wonderful, he said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. What is the catch? There is always a catch. He wants to meet with you tomorrow, Morga admitted. To judge whether you are worthy of me, it is a test, Thomas. He will try to intimidate you to find weaknesses. But if you can stand your ground, prove to him that you are strong enough to protect me and make me happy, he will give us his blessing. Thomas pulled back enough to look at her, his gray eyes searching her face. And if I fail this test? You will not fail, Morga said with more confidence than she felt. You have already proven yourself in every way that matters. You just need to show my father what I already know, that you are brave and honorable and stubborn enough to hold your own against anyone, even a warlord. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. I will meet with him. I will do whatever it takes to keep you, Morga. You are worth facing down any number of intimidating warlords. Morga kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. I love you, she whispered. No matter what happens tomorrow, that will not change. I love you too, Thomas said, and we will get through this together just like everything else. The meeting the next day was held in Crag's private chambers rather than the public hall, which Morga took as a good sign. Her father was not trying to humiliate Thomas in front of the clan, at least. She waited outside as the two men faced each other, forbidden to attend by her father's direct order. This is between men, Crag had told her. You will have your say later. So Morga paced the corridor outside. Her nerves wound tight as she tried not to imagine every possible disaster that could be unfolding behind that closed door. Inside, Thomas stood before Warlord Crag with his spine straight and his head high, refusing to be cowed by the massive orc who could kill him with one hand. Crag studied him with the same assessing gaze Morga had inherited, looking for weaknesses, for deception, for any sign that Thomas was not what he claimed to be. You are a farmer, Crag said finally, but you fight like a soldier. What is your history, Thomas Dalton? I served 10 years in the border regiments, Thomas answered honestly. I fought in the last war between your people and mine. I killed orcs because that was my duty, and I do not apologize for it. But I also do not pretend it was glorious or noble. War is ugly, and it left scars I will carry forever. Yet you took an orc woman as your wife, Crag observed. How do I know you do not harbor hatred for her people in your heart, that you will not mistreat her when the novelty wears off? Because I love her, Thomas said simply. Not despite what she is, but because of who she is. Morga is brave and kind and strong in ways that have nothing to do with physical power. She makes me laugh. She makes me want to be better. When I look at her, I do not see an orc or a warlord's daughter. I see my wife, my partner, the woman I would die to protect. Crag was silent, his expression unreadable. Pretty words. Let us see if you can back them with action. If I gave you a choice right now, your freedom or Morga's, which would you choose? Hers, Thomas said without hesitation. Every time. I would spend the rest of my life in chains if it meant she was free and happy. Even if she married another man, lived a life that did not include you. The question was cruel, designed to cut deep, and Thomas's face showed the pain of it, but his answer remained steady. Even then. I want Morga to be happy more than I want anything for myself. If she could only have that happiness without me, I would accept it. Crag studied him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. You mean it. I can see it in your eyes. You truly love my daughter. He paused, something that might have been grudging respect crossing his features. She chose well, better than I did for her. Thomas allowed himself a small smile. With respect, Warlord, I think I am the one who benefited from the bargain. Morga is extraordinary. She could have had anyone. I am grateful every day that she chose me. You are aware that this marriage makes you a target, Crag said, shifting topics abruptly. Gromek is not a forgiving enemy. He will try to hurt me through Morga, and that means he may come after you both. Can you protect my daughter from that threat? I will do everything in my power to keep her safe, Thomas said. I cannot promise I will always succeed. I am only human, after all, but I promise I will never stop trying. And Morga is not helpless. She is learning to fight, to defend herself. Together, we are stronger than either of us alone. Together, Crag repeated, testing the word. Then, abruptly, he stood and extended his hand. Very well, Thomas Dalton. You have my permission to take my daughter back to your homestead. I will send word to the border settlements that you are under my protection, that any who harm you will answer to the Iron Peak clans. It is not much, but it may give Gromek pause before he acts rashly. Thomas clasped Crag's hand, the gesture sealing an agreement between them. Thank you, Warlord. That is more than I hoped for. Treat her well, Crag said gruffly, or I will come south and remove your head from your shoulders. Clear, perfectly clear, Thomas agreed, and there was the ghost of a smile on his face. When Morga was finally allowed back into the room, she found the two most important men in her life standing together without visible hostility, and relief flooded through her in a wave. It is settled, Crag told her. You will return to the lowlands with your husband. But Morga, he paused, and she was shocked to see emotion flickering in his dark eyes. Come back sometimes. Let me see that you are well. You are still my daughter, even if you have chosen a different life. Morga crossed to her father and embraced him, something she had not done since she was a child. Crag stiffened in surprise, then his arms came around her carefully, as though afraid she might break. I will come back, Morga promised against his chest, and you can come visit us too. See the homestead, meet the chickens that terrorize Thomas. Crag laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound was like music. I would like that, he admitted. They left the mountain stronghold 3 days later, loaded down with supplies and gifts from Crag's treasury. The warlord himself saw them off, along with a small honor guard that would escort them back to the lowlands and ensure they reached the homestead safely. The journey south was easier than the journey north had been, without bindings or fear, with the spring thaw beginning to soften the worst of the winter cold. Thomas and Morga rode side by side, talking and planning and dreaming about the life they would build together. We will need to plant soon, Thomas mused as they descended into the familiar rolling hills of the frontier. The fields have been neglected for weeks. It will be a lot of work to make up the time. Then we will work hard, Morga said, together, like always. They reached the homestead on a bright afternoon in early March, and Morga felt her heart lift at the sight of the weathered log house, the barn where she had first taken shelter, the fields lying fallow but ready for the spring planting. It looked different now, not like a temporary haven but like home. Thomas helped her down from her horse, and they stood for a moment just looking at the place, absorbing the reality that they were finally here, finally safe, finally free to build the life they had fought so hard for. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dalton," Thomas said softly, and Morga heard the weight of promise in those words. "Welcome home, Mr. Dalton," she echoed, and kissed him as the sun warmed their faces and the future stretched out before them bright with possibility. The months that followed were filled with the satisfying rhythm of farm work and married life. They planted the fields with wheat and corn, worked the garden until it overflowed with vegetables, added to their small herd of cattle and the ever-multiplying chickens. Morga proved to have unexpected talent for animal husbandry, gentle enough to coax even the most stubborn cow into cooperation, and Thomas teased her that she had found her calling. Neighbors from the surrounding homesteads, who had been wary at first of the human-orc couple in their midst, gradually warmed to them as they saw the genuine affection between Thomas and Morga, the way they worked side by side as equals. The local blacksmith's wife, a kind woman named Martha, became Morga's first real friend, teaching her the finer points of preserving food for winter and sharing gossip over tea. "You are good for Thomas," Martha told Morga one afternoon as they worked together making jam. "I knew Sarah before the fever took her. She would be happy to know he found love again, found someone who makes him smile the way you do." The words touched Morga deeply, giving her a sense of connection to the woman who had come before her, the ghost she had sometimes felt in the house during those first weeks. She said a silent thank you to Sarah Dalton for teaching Thomas how to love, for leaving him with a heart that could still open even after profound loss. True to his word, Cragg sent messengers periodically with news from the north and gifts for his daughter. The Blacktusk alliance had fractured as predicted, with Gromak nursing his wounded pride and making vague threats that never seemed to materialize into action. The other clans watched and waited, but Cragg's position remained strong, and he reported with gruff satisfaction that Morga's departure had not weakened him as much as he had feared. "Your father misses you," one messenger told Morga as she handed him fresh bread for his journey back. "He will not say it directly, but it is obvious to everyone in the stronghold. Tell him he is welcome to visit," Morga said. "The house is small, but we will make room." To her surprise, Cragg took her up on the offer late that summer, arriving with a small retinue and an almost sheepish expression. It was strange to see the mighty Warlord in the context of the humble homestead, his massive frame barely fitting through the doorways, but he made an effort to be pleasant, even complimenting Morga's cooking and accepting Thomas's offer to help with the harvest. Watching her father and her husband work together in the fields, Morga felt a swell of gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had dreamed of during those long weeks of flight and fear, not riches or glory, but simple acceptance, the ability to be herself without apology or compromise. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Cragg turned to his daughter with an expression of wonder. "You are content here," he said. "Truly content. I can see it in everything about you." "I am," Morga confirmed. "This is the life I was meant for, Father. Not thrones or politics, but this honest work, genuine connection, the freedom to choose my own path." "Then I am glad I let you go," Cragg said quietly. even though it was one of the hardest things I have ever done." Morga took her father's hand, her small green fingers wrapped around his massive scarred ones. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. For raising me to be strong enough to make this choice. For respecting that choice even when it cost you. For being a better father than you had to be." Crag cleared his throat roughly, blinking away what might have been moisture in his eyes. "You were always the best thing I ever made," he said gruffly. "Better than any alliance or victory. I am sorry it took me so long to see that." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead. Three people from vastly different worlds who had found a way to bridge the gaps and build something new. Autumn returned, painting the world in familiar shades of gold and crimson. Morga stood in the kitchen preparing bread, her hands moving through the familiar motions with practiced ease, and felt a flutter of movement in her belly that made her pause and press her palm flat against the swell there. Thomas came in from the fields to find her standing frozen, her face a mixture of awe and surprise, and concern flashed across his features. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" "No," Morga said, grabbing his hand and placing it where hers had been. "Wait, just wait." They stood together in breathless anticipation, and then it came again, a definite flutter, a tiny nudge from the life growing inside her. Thomas's eyes went wide, his face transforming with wonder. "The baby," he whispered. "I felt the baby move." Morga had known she was pregnant for a few weeks, the signs unmistakable once she recognized them, but she had been nervous about telling Thomas, unsure how he would react to the complicated reality of a half-human, half-orc child. Now, seeing the joy blazing in his face, she felt foolish for ever doubting. "We are going to have a baby," she said, laughing through sudden tears. "A tiny person who is part of both of us." Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that acknowledged the precious cargo she carried. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you and our child and this life we have built. You are my everything, Morga." "And you are mine," she whispered back, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. The child was born the following spring, on a morning when cherry blossoms drifted like snow outside the bedroom window. The birth was long and difficult, but Martha was there to help, and Thomas held Morga's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement and love. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and perfect, Martha placed the tiny bundle in Morga's arms and both parents gazed down in wonder at their daughter. She had Thomas's gray eyes and Morga's green skin, a perfect blending of two worlds, two peoples who had been enemies for generations. "She is beautiful," Thomas breathed, his finger carefully stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "What should we name her?" Morga looked at her daughter, at the miracle they had created together, and thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear and flight, the courage it took to choose her own path, the love she had found in the most unexpected place. "Hope," she said softly. "We will call her Hope." Thomas smiled, that brilliant transformative smile that still made Morga's heart skip. "Hope Dalton," he said, testing the name. "It is perfect." Crag arrived a month later, having received word of his grandchild's birth, and the fearsome warlord turned to absolute mush when Martha placed baby Hope in his arms. He cradled her with surprising gentleness, his scarred face soft with wonder as tiny fingers wrapped around one of his tusks. "She has your spirit," he told Morga, unable to take his eyes off the baby. "I can see it already. This one will change the world." "Perhaps she already has," Thomas observed, watching as the most powerful orc chieftain in the north cooed nonsense at his granddaughter. "If you had told me 2 years ago that I would be married to an orc, living peacefully on my homestead with a beautiful daughter and my father-in-law as a regular visitor, I would have thought you were insane. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never imagined for ourselves, Morga said, settling into the chair beside her husband with a contentment that went bone deep. As the years passed, the Dalton homestead became something of a legend in the frontier territories, the place where a human farmer and an orc warlord's daughter had built a life together against all odds, proving that love could bridge even the deepest divides. Other mixed couples began to appear, emboldened by Thomas and Morga's example, and slowly, gradually, the old prejudices began to soften. Hope grew into a bright, curious child who was equally at home learning to read with her father and practicing knife throwing with her grandfather. She was joined by a brother 2 years later, a boy they named Samuel, who had Thomas's dark hair and Morga's pointed ears, and then another daughter, Grace, who was the image of her grandmother Sarah according to the old-timers who remembered her. The house that had once been too quiet with grief rang with laughter and the chaos of family life. Thomas expanded the homestead, adding rooms and a larger barn, and Morga started a small school in the settlement, teaching both human and orc children together, planting seeds of understanding that would flower in the next generation. On warm summer evenings, they would sit on the porch together as they had done since those first tentative days of their courtship, watching their children play in the yard, and marvel at how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked once, in one of those moments of quiet reflection. "Giving up your life in the mountains, everything you knew for this?" Morga looked at her husband, at the lines that time and laughter had etched around his eyes, at the strength and gentleness that defined him. She looked at their children, healthy and happy and free to choose their own paths. She looked at the homestead they had built together with love and stubbornness and faith in each other. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "This is exactly where I am meant to be. I scrubbed your floors in rags, never telling you I was the orc warlord's only daughter, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. Because it led me here to you, to this life that is more than I ever dreamed possible." Thomas pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I found you scrubbing my floors," he mused, "and you gave me back my life. Seems like a fair trade." "More than fair," Morga agreed. "The best bargain I ever made." They sat together as the sun set and the stars emerged, their children's laughter drifting on the evening breeze, and knew without question that they had found something rare and precious, a love that transcended difference, a partnership built on equality and respect, a family created from courage and hope. The story of the farmer and the warlord's daughter would be told for generations, a testament to the truth that the strongest walls are the ones we build around our hearts, and the greatest victories come when we find the courage to tear those walls down and let love in. And in a little homestead on the frontier, surrounded by the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination, Thomas and Morga Dalton lived that truth every single day, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the smallest act of kindness, like offering shelter to a stranger in threadbare clothes who happened to be scrubbing your floors.